Yeah, but there's also possible legal history in the making. Now, last month, Cabinet announced that it had approved a bill that criminalises hate speech and hate crimes, which is now under review by Parliament. That was meant to be heard this week. This comes as South Africa sentenced Vicki Member to prison for the use of the K-word, a first for this country. But while some say that this is exactly what South Africa needs to deal with racism especially, others say it could be the end of free speech. To discuss this bill further, we're joined by Gushwell Brooks from the South African Human Rights Commission. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Brooks. So, first, let's clarify, because we've heard of hate speech before. John Oilani was given a fine for speaking out against gays. So, explain how this bill will change what we already have in place.
So, to make it clear, constitutionally and in terms of the Equality Act, or PAPUDA as well, as that's the shortened version of the Act concerned, hate speech is already an offence. It's already something that is unlawful within our legal and constitutional system. What this bill does is that it criminalises it now, so it takes it a step further. So obviously, let's assume that you commit an act of hate speech against me, I can take you in the current form, can take you to the Equality Court, and the Equality Court can settle it and maybe find you guilty, fine you, and prescribe certain rehabilitative processes, and the South African Human Rights Commission regularly plays a role in that space. Alternatively, as in the Momberg case, what we also found was that apart from the Equality Court proceedings which we initiated, the police officers concerned had also charged Vicki Member in this instance with a specific crime of criminalises, which is an affront to someone's dignity, which is not necessarily directly linked to hate speech, but obviously we see how hate speech tied into this one.
Although it seems similar, if you look at the bill, we're outlining here, hate speech is an offence recognised under any law. The Commission is motivated on the basis of that person's prejudice, bias or intolerance, and we're talking about going against someone because of their race, discriminating because of gender, sex, ethnic or social origin. So why would having a hate speech law help when we already have crime and injuria, which is that assault on your dignity?
Yeah, I think the complexity and what the aim is in this particular instance is to specifically, and I'm talking about the bill in this instance, is to specifically criminalise acts of hate speech. So in other words, I can take you to court on the basis that you have committed an act of hate speech, which is then the specific crime that that you're interrogating in this instance. Whereas criminalises is very derivative, and you have to interpret what was said. So it doesn't necessarily, criminalises doesn't have, so these are specific grounds that are highlighted. So does the Constitution also highlight specific grounds, as well as the Equality Act also highlights specific grounds. Whereas criminalises is something that's a little more general and amorphous, because criminalises doesn't give us specific grounds on which one has to infringe on the dignity of another person. So it could be what you say, it could be something, how you conduct yourself, something that you do. Whereas this is a lot more specific.
And will it help authorities to go after racists?
Well, the issue is, and I think it's something that we have to think about as a country, and this is what the Commission's submission has been on the idea of a hate speech bill and a hate crimes bill, is that we shouldn't be reliant on the idea of trying to legislate away racism or any other form of prejudice, for example. So let's talk about homophobia, let's talk about xenophobia, and many of the other social ills that we have as a nation. We can't just necessarily try to legislate it away. And apart from it, another consideration to take into account is that what we in essence doing is it coming out of the Momberg case, considering that this was someone that was criminally found guilty. The issue is that are we then sending the message that you need to be careful doing these types of actions or saying these types of things in a public space, or maybe getting caught on a video camera with audio, as opposed to maybe doing it in private. So these are some of the considerations that we need to think about before we say that let's just go strong arm and legislate away these particular issues.
So are you opposing the bill? What is the Human Rights Commission stance?
So the Commission has had a look at the initial bill in its initial form, and we gave our inputs. Of course, the new bill that has been approved by Cabinet and is going to Parliament, that we have not necessarily looked at yet, and that we have not given our inputs on yet. But apart from that, the fact of the matter is that the Commission is not necessarily opposed entirely to the idea of criminalising, but what we need to understand is that we need to comply with the limitations as set out within the Constitution. So we're looking at Section 16 of the Constitution, which outlines and already limits, because part of what you mentioned is people all too often highlight the issue of freedom of expression. Freedom of expression as it stands within our Constitution is already limited and excludes hate speech. So in other words, you don't have freedom of expression that is unlimited. It is limited, but your freedom of expression cannot extend lawfully to things like hate speech and the propagation of hate.
So now you want us to go after people who are guilty of hate speech without suppressing their freedom of speech?
Yeah, no. Look, freedom of expression will not be suppressed if you exercise it within the constitutional and the legal limits.
Can we comment on something? This is someone from the Free Market Foundation saying that this bill effectively abolishes freedom of expression by insulting the president with the intention to ridicule him based on his occupation. You're committing a crime. By mockingly referring to lawyers as blood-sucking parasites, you're committing a crime. It talks about beliefs, so racists themselves have a belief they can be prejudiced against. Something else, if a teacher accuses a pupil of being a bad learner, they're committing hate speech. If a feminist says Afrikaner culture is patriarchal, they're committing hate speech.
Well, I think that's a bit of an overextension of the definition of how this bill then would extend. I do believe that the bill wouldn't extend to that particular level, whereby referring to the fact that society is patriarchal then in turn becomes a crime in itself. I mean, this is not to limit and have people talk nicely to each other and sort of quell debate in the process, and you're not being able to say certain things. What I think the bill is aiming to do is to criminalize some of the activities that we've seen within society. And let's be honest, this is why we need to understand hate speech. It doesn't just extend to the K word, it extends to many other aspects of society. So whether it be xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, the list is endless of some of the things that people say and do towards particular groups of people that are vulnerable. And that is what the bill should be limiting. The bill should, however, not be overextending the limitations based on freedom of expression. And we have a constitutional principle. And I'm pretty sure that if the bill finds itself in a space whereby it does overextend its reach in terms of what is limited and what is allowed to be said and what is not allowed to be said or done, surely there's a constitution that we can go back to and say, but hang on, this is a violation of my rights.
In the courts.
Exactly. And this is something that we always need to be cognizant of. If a bill or a law is passed as an act and becomes an act, and it does not hold constitutional muster, it doesn't stand the test that is set out based on the Bill of Rights and the rights that we have within the Bill of Rights, that bill then becomes unlawful and unconstitutional and cannot be enforced. And we always have that opportunity with any particular act. So obviously it's a bit difficult now at this stage to say that these are the limitations, these are the concerns that we have. Let's see what comes before Parliament. Of course, the Commission will make its submissions. Other interest parties will also make their submissions, especially if there's an overreach and an overextension becomes unconstitutional, and then we can take it from there.
All right, so keep calm for now, and we'll watch the progress of this bill as it goes to Parliament. Thank you so much for that great clarity. That was Gushwell Brooks from the Human Rights Commission. We'll take a short break. We'll be back with more news.